We are very grateful to our sponsor this evening. More Able Than This is sponsored by the Music Department at Georgia College and State University. In addition to bachelor's degrees in music and in music therapy, including a BA plus MAT path to initial music teacher certification, GCSU offers an online master's degree in music education for certified teachers seeking to improve or expand their knowledge and skills, as well as a hybrid Master of Arts in Teaching degree for those seeking initial teacher certification in Georgia. We accept certified and licensed teachers from across the U.S., and Georgia certification is reciprocal with most other states. So don't let state boundaries deter you from applying. Apply now to start in spring or summer 2025. For more information about these degree programs, contact me at tina.holmes-davis@gcsu.edu. That's tina.holmes-davis@gcsu.edu. Welcome to More Able Than This, the podcast where we discuss everything related to disability and music education. More Able Than This is sponsored by the Music Department at Georgia College and State University, Georgia's designated public liberal arts university. Today we'll be talking about bringing opportunities for all musicians into your school system with our special guest, Mr. Jay Wucher. In addition to being one of my dear friends, Mr. Wucher holds bachelor's and master's degrees in music education from the University of Southern Mississippi and a specialist degree in educational leadership and curriculum from the University of West Georgia. While employed as the coordinator for music education in Fulton County School System, Mr. Wucher provided leadership for a staff of over 200 music teachers and music therapists. During his 32 years in Fulton County, he also served as an elementary, middle, and high school band director, county department chair in music education, and acting executive director of secondary curriculum. Mr. Wucher supervised the system's 4 magnet programs and was the executive director of the Fulton County Employees Charitable Fund. Currently, he teaches with me at Georgia College and State University and is the fine arts consultant for the Baldwin County Schools. He previously held a similar position in Clark County. All right, so it sounds like you're the person to talk about what we need to do from the administrative side, huh?
I hope so. I think it's music therapy programs are they're not any different than anything else in that if people want to do something, they'll do it. If they don't find that it's important, they won't. I love telling the story of how music therapy got started in Fulton County because it's a unique story that's very personal. That as I look back, it's just not that hard to do. And you know, as I've talked with people, they say, "Yeah, it's a good idea," and then they say, "Well, it costs money." I said, "Well, yeah, but other things do." In other words, if it's important to you, you're going to do it. If it's not that important, you're not. It's
Sure.
That's simple. Anyway, let me go back historically a little bit.
Sure.
And hopefully, as I'm speaking, if you're in the audience, you'll get some questions because I hope that this is more interactive, even though I can't talk to you face to face. I would really love for you to do a chat box or whatever communication method you do, so I can give you some more insights and for more information. Okay, so let's roll back maybe 30 years, maybe, well, maybe, yeah, 30 to 40 years anyway. I started my career as a band director in a small community in Hapeville, Georgia. And along with my assignment as a band director, I also had the opportunity to teach private lessons in Forest Park, and actually not very far from where Dr. HD had her first teaching job, just less than a mile, I believe.
Sure, yeah.
And the owner of the music store was a wonderful man. He's still to this day a role model to me, Mr. Dominic Atina, who is a retired sergeant in the Army. I had played in the Fort McPherson band, among others. But anyway, Nick was a wonderful role model to me. He was a great sax player and just like a dad away from home. And one of his daughters, Joni, was a terrific flute player who had gone through the Forest Park High School band program, then on to UGA and got her degree as a music therapist. And I didn't really know much about it, but Joni also taught lessons in the store as I did. We taught in studios, and people that are, we were both fairly young at the time. I was probably no more than the late 20s at the oldest, I guess, maybe even younger than that. But we would talk in between lessons, and I said, well, what does a music therapist do, Joni? And she said, well, we work with special needs kids and we give them targeted types of experience and trainings that we've been trained to be able to deliver. And it really relieves the music teacher who does not have the training to do it.
Sure.
And she went on and on and on. I don't need to talk too much about that. I'm sure you covered all kinds of stuff about what music therapists do and how they do it. But for me, it's like, well, good. How do you get it in the schools? That's kind of where I'm going with it. So what? And by the way, Joni's mom, Mary, was a seamstress. She was actually a nurse by trade, but loved sewing costumes. And Joni invited me to a program one night at North Clayton High School's holiday concert, and just for special needs kids. And so I went there and I saw this, and I hope you take this in the spirit that I'm saying it, but I stopped feeling sorry for special needs kids that night.
Thank you. Yes.
I said, what am I feeling sorry for? These kids are having a ball. They're having the best time of their lives. Look at this. And I was just absolutely taken with it after all Joni had talked to me about. And I just thought, wow, this is the sort of thing that everybody deserves to have music. It just needs to have a person that can do it the right way. It's kind of where I was mentally on it. And so I that night, I reflected and I said, I don't know if I'd ever be in a position to provide a music therapy program for anybody, but if I ever get to where I can do it, that's number one on my list. And so fortunately, I continued with my career. Moved to another high school about my 6th year into the career and stayed there for about 10 years, but continued to teach privately and continued to see Joni as a friend, of course. And so I was able to go to the district office as the music coordinator in Fulton in '88. And so, I put in 16 years teaching anywhere from grade 4 through grade 12 in middle school and in elementary when we only had 4 through 8 or K through, or actually grades 1 through 7. But the point is, I had seen it all and done it all by then. And I felt very fortunate and also very qualified to take my role in as music coordinator for Fulton, and stayed there for 16 years. And good at my word, which I usually am. I said, as soon as I'm able to, I'm going to get a music therapy program going. And, I didn't say it to anybody except myself. So time goes on, and I've been in a position just a year or two. And Joni calls me up one day, and she says, remember we used to talk about having a music therapist go to Fulton County? And I said, yes. She said, well, I've got just the right one for you. I went, oh, really? And she said, yep. And she did. It was somebody that had done her internship in the Clayton County Schools, which, by the way, their music therapists to this day are not part of the music department. They're part of the special ed department.
In Clayton or in Fulton?
In Clayton.
Oh, yeah, that seems.
Yeah, but not in Fulton because I was insistent once we got the ball rolling that, not because I was a control freak, but because I wanted the kids to have as much music as they did therapy. And that was, to me, that was important.
Sure.
I didn't want them, anyway, to go on. so I walked in on my assistant superintendent, who was a real rough, he wore cowboy boots, and he grew up in Central Florida, and he had horses and a ranch and all this kind of stuff. He was not a particularly warm fuzzy at all,
It's okay.
but he was married to a music therapist.
Hmm.
And I don't know if that's coincidental or if it had anything to do with it, but his name was Oscar Perry. He's long gone now. And I said, Mr. Perry, uh, I have an idea. I don't know if you'll agree to it or not, but I think it's the right thing to do. And he says, well, tell me, what do you want? Just make it quick. Yes, sir. And I said, well, I understand you're married to a music therapist, and so you know the value, but we don't have anything like that in Fulton County. And look at all that special needs populations we've got. He says, you're right. And I said, well, he said, and I'll never forget this. He never even got up from his desk, just sat there, and he did this, which to me, I still call the papal wave. He just sort of brushed his arm across his face, said, just do it. Just do it.
Okay.
And I'm going, well, okay. And so I got back to Joni, and I said, well, I think I'm ready to interview this person.
Mhm.
And her name is Amber Weldon Stevens, and she
Uh-huh.
is still in Fulton County after well over 30 years. Um, and so I interviewed Amber, and there was a glitch to it because I could not outright hire teachers who worked at a particular school. I could
Yeah.
hire teachers in my position who are itinerant.
Okay.
I had to get her in the system somehow. And I knew that we had an opening at a school. I believe it was Mount Olive Elementary, if I'm not mistaken. I know the principal's name was Ron Lane, who was a great, great guy. And I called Ron up and I said, I know you're looking for a music teacher. He says, yeah, what have you got for me? Because that was the relationship I had with the
Sure.
principal. They depended on me, and I could interview for them or with them, whatever they wanted to do. It didn't matter to me. And but they were very appreciative of me being the screener, so to speak.
The person who.
Anyway, um, Ron says, well, I need a music teacher. And I said, well, there's a little catch to this, Ron. And he said, well, what is it? And I said, this young woman is board certified as a BMT, board music therapy certified, and also has a degree in music education.
Hmm.
And I need to get her in the system somehow. But ultimately, I want her to be a music therapist. He says, well, if she's any good, we'll consider it.
Okay.
Well, that was a big decision that he didn't know he had made.
Sure.
So Amber comes along, and her first year out of the chute, she's teacher of the year at her school. It was Conley Hills Elementary, as a matter of fact. That's where it was. And uh, I, I mean, she was and is a magnificent teacher. Just, I don't care what she's teaching. She's just taught drum majoring for the University of Georgia.
Hey.
She teaches at Kennesaw. I mean, she's just a natural, wonderful person and wonderful teacher. Anyway, we brought her on board. And then at the end of her year, I called him up, and I felt like, damn Yankees. Well, I'm calling in the bill here. And I said, Ron, remember the promise you made? He says, yeah, I do. I said, well, I'm taking her. And he said, okay, I agreed to it. She's great, but I know she'll be great, and we know it's needed. And so I rewarded Amber from being teacher of the year in general music to assigning her to 17 schools her next year as a music therapist.
So what did she do with those schools as a music therapist? Did she go in like weekly, or how did?
Yeah, she really did. And at that point, we were safe in only doing it in elementary schools.
Okay.
And so, because she knew that population, and it really didn't matter which disability it was. She was so well suited that it
Sure.
wouldn't matter hearing impaired, visually impaired, profound, severe. It just didn't matter. And she could work with all of them. And so we actually built the plane, or excuse me, we flew the plane while we were still building it that first year or two. And it really caught on because all of a sudden these schools are getting calls from their parents saying, oh my God, this is wonderful. Thank you for treating our kids equally.
Yes.
We've never had this, this is just so great. And that's really where it all started. So that's the very beginning of the program. But then, as with anything else, you have to start refining it.
Yeah.
And so they didn't know what was going on, the school district, other than the parents are happy.
Yes.
And then, but I will tell you, a part that I have left out, at least for now, was that my colleague, who I shared an office space with, was the art education director. And she was never going to take a back seat to anybody. She said, well, my damn, if you can have a music therapy program, we're
So
going to
can
have an art therapy program.
and those are related. Yeah.
Yeah. And I said, sounds good to me. So we went back to the boss, Mr. Perry, and he says, well, you're right, because we do have adaptive PE. We've always had that.
Yes.
So it was not any big deal. And Dr. Champlin, who was my counterpart in art, said, well, I'm not going to call it art therapy because they mess with your head. We're going to call it adaptive art because we're more interested in the kids producing art. And so that very decision still stands to this day. And it really falls in line with my belief that music therapy has to be richly in music and also serve their needs. But my goal was to teach children with disabilities music because our general music teachers teach music to children. It was the same goal. It was just finding people that were more qualified to deliver the instruction.
Yes.
And
Well,
so,
yeah, even in Baldwin County, last week we had Jay Warren from the Life Enrichment Center, and I was able to spend some time last year with their creative expressions groups getting ready for the concert. And it's amazing to watch. They work with the developmentally disabled adult population.
mhm,
It's amazing to watch the rehearsals because everything is focused on the concert that we're about to give, but the
yep,
music therapy is embedded under there. So
yeah,
they do a great job of, yeah.
it really is. It's, geez, I still, of all the things that I did in my career, that has to rank right up there with not only one of the best decisions, but also the one that actually made the most difference of so many things that I was fortunate enough to have the opportunity to do, mostly in Fulton and now even
Sure.
in Clark and Baldwin. Uh, but then the question comes up, well, this is all well and good, but how do you convince your administration? And luckily, I didn't have too much of that because we had not necessarily a champion, but I would say an advocate
Sure.
at the district level who knew what it was about and why it was about, and nobody was going to mess with him because he and the superintendent were thick as thieves. And so it was like, he's in our corner and he ain't going away and he likes it. So, and not only that, the thing that is most important to administrators, and I don't care who you ask or what the circumstances are, is how do you make me look good?
Sure.
And this made them look good,
Sure.
particularly because the special needs community is vocal.
They
They
have to be.
are uncompromising. They want
They have to.
absolutely the best treatment for their children, as anybody should. And
Yes.
they're right. And a lot of times we're shaking our head going, what do we do? Well, I'll tell you what, music therapy it was great because we never got, I was in administration for 15 out of my 16 years, 15 of those years we had music therapy. And
Yeah.
I never got a complaint from anybody about anything. Now, I will say that we had some disagreements, and I'll cover those in a minute, but it was all part of the growing process. Let's put it this way: we had disagreements; we were never disagreeable.
Sure.
We chose to agree to disagree in some cases, but you know who that was mostly with? The special ed department,
Well,
because
sure. And because they're getting things they've never imagined.
Yeah, and they didn't know how to handle it.
Mm.
For instance, we don't provide music, general music services to preschool children. But I was insistent because I was told to be persistent by our lead music therapist, Amber, that preschool special needs children need it
That's where we
because
start.
they're already developmentally delayed. This is
Yeah.
just going to delay them more
Mhm.
because all of the research clearly shows how much um, development in speech and oral skills and everything can be brought out through music where it may not be able to be brought out by other things. We know
Sure.
that. And
Hmm.
so we would go round and round, especially, but we always had, it was great. They had just such great people in the special ed department, and they were great to work with even when we disagreed. They were just fun. And every year in the spring, uh, and when we assigned Amber to it was done during the summer with her, but every year in the spring, we would meet with the special ed department, and then we would identify by priority the most necessary services based on what their priorities were. For instance, if they decided that number one on the list is profound and severe intellectually handicapped or disabled children, then that's what it was. Or uh, orthopedically impaired, you name it. And it was never up to me. What I did is I arranged the meeting and I sat back and let Amber do the work because she's brilliant and still is. Now, the other
Hmm.
thing that I think I need to tell you is that she was the last music therapist I ever hired because I gave her authority to recommend every single music therapist after her.
Sure.
So for the first few, she and I would interview together, and then I would rubber stamp whatever she said because I had enough sense to listen
Sure.
to her. Still do to this day,
Hmm.
and she would bring on um, she would bring on the very best people and from all over the country because we also became an intern site
Sure.
within a few years, and so in a lot of cases we grew our own. And when you talk about great music therapy programs around the country, there's a lot of them right here in the Southeast, including
Yes.
Georgia College. I rank that right up there with any of them, including Loyola,
Mhm.
including,
UGA.
well, yeah, absolutely, UGA, Florida State, and um, even one in Kansas, believe it or not.
Hmm.
We've had them coming from all over the country, and we've had interns come from all over the country. And
Hmm.
so we would grow our own. Now, here's the other thing that was absolutely critically important then, and from what I understand from my successors, is not quite as rigid now, but I insisted that any music therapist we hired had to be duly certified. They had to have a degree in music ed and a BMT in music therapy. And the
That's
reason for
what they
that,
do.
the reason for that was I didn't want their jobs to go away
Sure.
because they were therapists that were trained to teach special needs children
Yes.
music.
Yes.
And so,
So,
my entire tenure there, that's what we did. Now, it may have changed a little since then because you wouldn't be able to get that program out of Fulton County with, an atomic bomb. There's the walls would crumble before they'd let that program go. And now they have like 16 full-time music therapists serving
sure.
pre-K through 12.
Okay, so are the therapists embedded in the various schools? Like there's a therapist at each school?
No, absolutely not. We have centers.
Okay.
So it's really done kind of both ways. We have centers um, that um, that have a special needs wing that's
Hmm.
so it's totally adaptable. And yet there are other places where the children and the leadership prefers to do mainstreaming, and
Hmm.
so we can work with them too. But I will promise you that the music therapy staff and the general music staff are joined at the hip and they
Well,
work with each other for mainstreaming. But it, the the results over the past several years have shown that most of the therapists and most of the parents prefer to go to the music therapists with special training, not the general music teacher.
So, or even, could they, we do a lot, even academically, with collaborative classes where they're taught by a special ed teacher and an academic, like, subject teacher. But, it might even be possible to have classes that are taught in certain areas by a music educator and a music therapist. Although the terminal degree for music therapy is still a doctorate of education in music therapy. I don't think the undergrads are overlapped like that, but the higher up you go, they're educators and therapists.
Well, all I know is that and I think it was a trademark of Fulton County to a point, but with such a large staff, by the time I left, I had 240 teachers.
Yeah.
But because of so many good programs, such great orchestras, particularly in Fulton, and then really, really fine bands, choirs, jazz ensembles. I don't want to say there was jealousy, but there was a little bit of competition, but there was never competition with the music therapist. Any teacher that had a chance to work with a music therapist, not just in general music, thought they were a godsend.
Sure.
And Amber, of course, was a band kid. She's a fine saxophone player and drum major at UGA. So she comes from a band background and could talk just as clearly about how band directors or orchestra directors or choral directors could integrate special needs children into their programs successfully. I used to see it all the time. It was just so inspiring. And
and that's what we want. Yeah.
Yeah. So from that standpoint, there was some, that visibility and that camaraderie that really is critical to a good department. I don't care what subject area you're talking about, but a good department working well together. So it's that cohesiveness, that integration, that ability to support each other that I'm very proud of. And that remains to this day.
Good. Yeah. So y'all started with just the elementary schools and you grew. Did you grow as the children grew, or
Yes.
did you?
Yeah, you see, that was part of it. That was very important. That and that's how we wound up being a pre-K 12 program,
Okay.
because we grew exponentially numbers wise because the parents insisted that they continue to get services as their kids got older, and so we didn't have to sell it. And
I'm sorry, that's what Julie Duty of United Sound says. She says, at the very first, when you try to become a United Sound school, then there can be a lot of pushback. And she said, really, the pushback usually comes from the parents because they've been told no for so long that they really don't believe their students can do it. But she said after a few years, that pushback stops and people are like, this is our band program, or, whatever.
That's
and
right.
They're super proud.
They absolutely are. And here's another thing that made Fulton County unique, and I still haven't figured out why it has to be unique. I'm sorry, but this is, what do I call it? Administrative blindness, which I guess sometimes is redundant. But in this case, it really is stupid. And pardon, but when they asked me about scheduling, see, when I came to the coordinator's position, they didn't have a music teacher in every school. It was sort of like the principals that wanted them. And my predecessor, Joe Kirshner, helped with that. And by the time I got into the position, they bought the idea that we don't need a music specialist, a general music specialist at every school. We need a general music specialist for every 30 classes.
Ooh.
Because 6 days a week, 5 days a week, 6 classes, that's 30 classes. And I also proposed to them that one of those classes needed to be a performance class.
Sure.
Because the busing, so, take that one 45-minute slot every week and you can have your chorus, or you can have an orff group, or you could have a clogging group, which we had, or you could have a steel drum group, which we had. All these different things. I didn't care what it was, as long as they had the how and they did something. And we relied on the talents of the teachers, not some administrative blindness that told them what they had to do. And so once we got that formula in place for general music, then it was a very simple matter of supplanting the services of the general music teacher to teach a population of kids that were best served by a teacher with experience in that area.
And that's really what we're talking about, and that's what I really try to support my pre-service teachers, especially to provide what services we can for our students with disabilities. But there does sometimes come a point, especially with what we might call our severe profound students.
Yes.
There does come a point where they're beyond what we can do. And I'm thinking specifically back to the creative expressions concerts that Jay Warren supports there in Milledgeville. And there are some performers in those groups that probably could have functioned in ensembles at their schools, and there are some performers who probably couldn't.
One thing that always struck me, and I didn't mind, because the therapists, they looked at me not as their boss, they looked at me as their advocate.
Sure.
Because if they said, well, we need this kind of machine, or if we, all I did was I would just roll it into part of my budget and say, we need this, I treated them just like any other teacher. It was just that simple. If they need an adaptive apparatus for something, well, somebody else needs a saxophone. Okay, so you just buy it. And in other words, if we had money, we were going to buy it, and they were treated, they were treated better, a little better than others, but they didn't ask for much. But what they asked for, we made sure they got.
Yeah, was there special education funding available in part to help with
Never
some of the adaptations?
Never asked for it. It all came through the music budget. The only thing that the special ed folks did was to help us identify priorities, help us getting people into schools for scheduling, and basically be a support system. And something that was plenty. That's all we needed.
All right.
It was such a win-win that we didn't really need much more than that, because when the program got rolling, everybody said, oh, this is the greatest thing I've ever seen. It took pressure off the classroom teachers. It took pressure off the general music teachers. It gave music therapist specialists a real purpose in what they were doing, and they were and are appreciated, and gave an entire underserved population the experience of being able to learn and enjoy music. And everything I'm saying for music, you could say the same thing for art, because Dr. Champlin, my counterpart, was absolutely as dedicated and as focused on providing the very best for the adaptive art children as I was. So, you could just say it was the same thing. And since they already had adaptive PE, like I said, it wasn't that hard to sell. If we're going to have PE, and if we're going to have music, and we're going to have art, then we're going to have adaptive PE and music therapy and adaptive art. It's that simple. It wasn't, So that's really, I guess, in a nutshell, the history and the evolution, I would say, of a program that to this day it's at this point, it's still the largest music therapy program in the country.
Sure, yeah. Well, and did you see in the performances with the students with disabilities, did you see that there was a dramatic difference in quality of musical performance? Were they able to put on, quality music as well as have the process of being able to make music?
I would think so, yes. And a lot of the performances that I observed were standalone. They were, this Miss So-and-so special needs class is going to perform so-and-so. I can remember going to schools all the time, but I could also go to schools. I can also remember going to halftime shows and seeing kids that were disabled, that were not disabled, that were very able,
Sure.
that performed great, and you know, it, it took the focus off their disability and put the focus
Yes.
on their ability.
Yes. And that's what David Knabb, who is a fellow stroke survivor and one-handed woodwind, he actually made a one-handed saxophone. He
Hmm.
says, with his one-handed saxophone, then he's not disabled. He's just a saxophone player.
That's right. Yeah.
So yeah, and that's kind of the goal here is just to allow musicians to be musicians.
Yeah. I haven't been back. I've been retired from Fulton for 20 years. And for a while, I was working with them as a consultant. But, when you leave a job, you really ought to leave a job. And I
Yeah,
did.
let the next
Uh,
person do it.
and,
Yeah,
but we've had wonderful, wonderful music supervisors that have taken my place. And certainly the one there, Matt Koperniak, is amazing. But they've all been a little bit different, but none of them have been anything less than 100% supportive of music therapy, because it's a real, um, it's just a real bragging point for the
yes,
Fulton County School District. And like I said, it started off in breaks at a private lesson studio. That's where it all came from.
sure.
But as with anything else, if you do it responsibly and you do it with a good heart and you do it for the right reasons and you get the right people to listen to you, you can
Sure.
make it work.
Well,
So,
and having said that, I know that Dr. Whipple at Georgia College does some work at Baldwin County as
mhm.
in some music therapy. Is that an official position, or is she just bringing in a service because with the university is right there?
Well, it's really interesting. The current superintendent in Baldwin, Dr. Price, um, is a former principal in Fulton County,
I
and
remember.
and that's where she and I first got to know each other, and that's probably the reason I'm still working with her, because I worked with her in Clark also. But she had one of the music therapy centers in
Mhm.
her school, Woodland Elementary School up in Sandy Springs.
So she knows.
She knows firsthand, and we still to this day talk about the music therapists that she had over the years that we both dearly loved.
Uh-huh.
And so I didn't have anything to do with it. This was something that Dr. Price worked out with the college, and Dr. Whipple actually comes in, teaches in our schools in lieu of teaching some classes at Georgia College.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we pay for the services.
Okay.
In other words, we pay part of her Georgia College salary, but the impact, and she's not the only one who comes in. I know that she's got students coming in constantly. I see these kids with ukuleles and guitars,
Oh
and so I know
yeah.
where they're going, and I just see them. I run into them in the schools when I'm out. Um, but it's a very you don't hear as much about it as I wish we did,
Mm-hmm.
because they're doing wonderful work, and it really ought to be highlighted. Maybe with our new PR person, we can get a little bit more visibility with it. But it's been going on for several years. It's
Yes.
nothing new.
I think she uses it as a training opportunity for some of the students who are music therapy students, but they're not maybe out in their own practicum yet. They're still, kind of tailing her to see what to do.
Yeah, I really find it unfortunate that still to this day, I've talked with my colleagues at the administrative level about music therapy and how to implement it. And because most school systems still think that it's okay for a general music teacher to teach 900 kids or 300, depending on how many are in their school, and
Hmm.
still will not base their teaching staff on the number of classrooms, that they missed the boat, and it would be a perfect way to resolve it. Now, I
Sure.
will I will admit that it's more costly for Fulton because they do serve preschool children. I just remember going round and round with the special needs department on that. They said, "No, you can't do that." I said, "Why?" I said, "Particularly if it's in their IEP, why can't we do it?" And they just sort of said, "Okay, just never mind." They,
Yeah.
I don't dig my heels in very often, but when I do, people usually are good to listen, and that was my experience with the special needs folks. They were,
Sure.
I didn't ask for much from them. I gave them a lot and willingly and happily, and always enjoyed getting along with them. But when I said, no, I think we really need to focus this way, they were good, because there were things that they said were important that I didn't necessarily think were, but I did what they said.
Well, and it sounds to me like perhaps that was a little bit of we've never done it that way, and we're not positive that you're going to support us, and we don't want to get left holding the bag when this falls
There
apart.
were a lot, yeah, their biggest concern, of course, was where do we stand legally?
Yes.
And like I said, I never even came close to a complaint. Our guys and ladies that were the music therapists, they just loved them. They adored them. And again, I attribute that to their dedication. And there is a special type of person
Sure.
that
Yeah.
chooses that as a career. And particularly having that special type of person in a leadership position, as Amber Weldon Stevens is, to run herd over those folks, and then to get the support that they've always gotten at the administrative level, and nobody messes with them. They just don't. They say, you're doing a great job. We love you. We never get complaints, only good things. So why, it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Well, and that's kind of the point of this episode of the podcast, because what I hear a lot is, teachers who want to do it, they just don't know how, they don't know where to get started, or, they don't feel supported. And so we're not missing a population because people don't want to teach it. So now we're kind of looking at various avenues and various resources that are available so that we can put these things to.
Well, and in our class that we teach together, I've had several of my students, quote, our students, contact me and say, well, I'm not really sure how to do special needs children that are mainstream. Well, frankly, I'm not either. I'm not a music therapist, but I give them somebody's email and they get in touch with them, and all of a sudden the world is opened up. And I'm not doing anything different with my charges in the MAT program than I used to do as Fulton County music supervisor, is that I would say, well, here's a good source for you.
That's why we brought you in for that particular class, because the things that you've always done are the things that we need.
Well, and I'm glad to hear that, and it's no different. And I have yet to ever find, well, for that matter, I've yet to ever find a music teacher, but especially a music therapist, that wasn't willing to help somebody.
Sure, sure.
They are so happy to be contacted, so happy to be asked.
Yes, well, and especially, and the parents, once we get the parents of students with disability to understand that their children can do these things, then, it just opens up a whole new world. And sometimes we're the only thing that these students are able to do, that they're welcome to do. And, if we don't have adaptive sports and we don't have adaptive art and we don't have these things, then, we have to do what we can, and that might be music. So.
Well, all I know is that, and of course, I since you and I know each other so well personally, I know where your beliefs and philosophies are. But the point is that, if we're going to raise our kids to be productive, then we need to give them as good an experience as we possibly can. And, how many times do you hear stories of kids that could do music and couldn't do anything else? And how would you know if you didn't try to reach them in the first place?
Sure, sure.
There's such a huge spectrum of special needs children.
Yes. Well, and that's why I always go back to my own, like my injury to my brain is catastrophic. And my neurologist just shakes his head. He says, you shouldn't be talking, you shouldn't be walking, you shouldn't be eating. And yet I am. And so all I need, even beyond my medical prognosis, I just needed the chance to do it.
Right.
And I will never play the way I played before my injury, but I can still play.
Yeah, it's really important, and it's it's a relationship with the arts is a lifelong journey, and whereas you can't do certain things, and I'm unfortunately at that stage of my life where there are things I can't do anymore. but I can still play and still enjoy it and still be
Yeah.
productive. And who's to say that we should not allow that for anybody that we teach?
To at least try. Yeah, I mean, they might not succeed, but yeah. So it is, and that's my whole thing. And I've said this before, I have been able to, with David Knabb's help, identify ways that I can still be a musician despite my injury. But I wouldn't be able to live with myself if I found a way for me to do it and didn't find a way for others to do it.
Exactly, exactly. And uh, the as I get older and spend more time observing, I get even more enamored and more appreciative and more in awe of what teachers do, and not just
Sure.
music, but because it's not the same ball game we used to play in. It's just different. It's so much more difficult. There's so many more demands on teachers, and the money's not great, but the rewards are great. And if you do it for the right reasons to begin with, it's great um, to be certainly to be a music educator. I've been in it for well over 50 years now, and there's no reason that I would want to stop. So
Yeah.
anyway, that's kind of what my experience and my message is to anybody that's watching us this evening, and hopefully it'll inspire you to continue to do what you're doing. It'll inspire you to be an advocate, to stop throwing your hands up and saying, "Well, it can't be done," um, because it can, even if it's not done to the extent that we were able to do it in Fulton County.
Start little.
Just remember that if you're that old video they show about the guys throwing the starfish in the water. I don't know if you see walking on the beach and somebody says, "What are you doing?" I said, "Well, I'm throwing starfish in the water." He says, "Well, you can't save every one." "Yeah, but I can save that one."
Sure. Yeah.
So pardon my dogs, they're getting all excited. We've got company coming. So
That All right, well, this brings us to the end of our episode. Thanks to Mr. Jay Wucher for joining us to discuss how we can bring opportunities for all into our school systems. We hope you feel inspired, equipped, and ready to work with the disabled musicians in your community. Sorry.
I'm sorry, and I am available if anybody would like to contact me. Um, j.wutcher@gcsu.edu.
Yeah.
So I'm available.
Outstanding. So if you learned something here, please like and subscribe to our show and return on October 25th for our next episode featuring Drs. Katie Whipple and Laurie Peeble, who are also at Georgia College and State University. Until then, this is Dr. Tina Davis reminding you that small efforts create meaningful results.